We know that the original Tisha was supposed to be a holiday. That was the day that 12 spies came back from going around the land of Israel. They brought back their report. 2 of them said great things. Yeah, it's a formidable enemy, but we'll be able to conquer it. That was Yehoshua, Joshua, and Caleb. But the other 10 said, no way. The cities and their inhabitants, too formidable. There's no chance. We won't be able to do it. And the Jewish people listened to the 10 spies that brought back the bad report, turned the hearts of the people away, and as a result, since then, since God said, you cried tears for no reason, I'm going to give you a reason to cry tears. And we've had thousands of years of those reasons, crying tears, fasting today on Tisha B'Av, hoping that someday soon the temple will be rebuilt. So what happened that day? When the Jewish people, our ancestors, listened to the bad report of the 10 spies instead of the good report of the 2 spies, what happened was that the people and those 10 spies didn't properly appreciate, didn't see the hand of God in their lives. God had said, I'm taking you to the promised land. Of course you'll be able to win. Don't look at what your eyes see. Don't listen to what the spies say. I'm on your side. If you pick teams and you pick first, like we do, and you pick God, doesn't matter if the opponent picks the next 10,000 people, you're going to win. But we didn't recognize that. And so I wanted to talk about recognizing the hand of God in our lives. And in order to do that, to begin, I wanted to go all the way back to the beginning, very beginnings of history. We're told that when Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava, were in Gan Eden, in the Garden of Eden, a river flowed out from the garden. And it separated into 4 tributaries, 4 headwaters. The name of the first is Pishon, which surrounds the land of Havilah. There's gold there, and the gold there is good. And also found there is crystal and onyx stones. The name of the second river is Gihon, which surrounds the land of Cush. The name of the third river is Hidekel, which surrounds the land of Ashur. And the 4th river is Pras. It's a little strange. We're told about the first 3, the name and where they are, not told about where the 4th one is, we just get the name. And the first one, we get this massive, relatively massive amount of information versus the 2nd, the 3rd, and the 4th. So regarding the 4th, Rashi, the greatest of the biblical commentators, helps us out. He says that last river, Pras, is the most important one. Pras is the Euphrates. Pras is going to be the border of the promised land, Israel. And so it's so important, all we need to know is its name. If I'm in the tri-state area and I say I'm going to the city, people don't say to me, oh, do you mean Manhattan or something else? I mean Manhattan. It's the city because it's so prominent, so important. So all we need to know is the name of the 4th one, and we got it, must be the Euphrates. But the first one, why all that detail? There's gold there, and the gold is good. If the Torah just told us, if God had just told us in the Torah, there's gold there, would we have raised our hand and said, God, just curious, 14 karat, 24 karat, just what type of gold are we talking about? God has to tell us, by the way, if you're wondering, it's good gold. And we need to be told that when the 4 rivers split, next to one of them, not only is there good gold, but there's crystal and there are onyx stones. Who cares? Why do we get these extraneous details right at the beginning of the Torah? There's no such thing as an extra detail in the Torah. If God wrote the Torah, he wrote every sentence and every word and every letter for a specific reason. So why all the detail for the first river? Here, Rashi tells us which river that was. The river Pishon, the first river, is the Nilus, the Nile. The Nile that ran through Egypt. The Nile that's going to get a lot of play later in the Torah. When are we going to hear all about the Nile later in the Torah? When it comes time for the Jewish nation to begin. After being enslaved for hundreds of years, God hears our groaning, the groaning of our ancestors, taps Moshe at the burning bush and says, I want you to go lead the Jewish people out. Moshe argues, but eventually agrees, and he heads to Egypt. And we know what happens next, the 10 plagues, and then we come out, and we cross the sea, and we're in the wilderness, and we get the Torah. You know what God's telling us? Right at the beginning of the Torah, that first river is the Nile. There's gold there, and it's good gold. Do you know what gold that is? That's the gold that our ancestors are going to leave with. That's the gold that are going to be slave reparations. That's the gold that God tells Moshe to tell the Jewish people, take gold and silver from your captors. So right at the very beginning of the Torah, God's giving us this little foreshadowing. Someday, when the Jewish people come out of Egypt to accept the Torah, the whole purpose, the reason that I created the world was to give the Torah and give it to the Jews and have them be unto the nations a light. The gold they're going to get out of there is good gold, and there's going to be crystal. Why is that important? Crystal is bedolach. That word appears later in the Torah. When the manna falls down from heaven. We're told that it looked like bedolach, which means that our ancestors, when that manna fell down from heaven, would have looked at it and said, wow, that's remarkable. It looks just like that fancy crystal that our captors, our slave masters used to have in their homes. And there's also onyx stones there. Who cares about onyx stones at the beginning of the Torah? You know why we care? Because when we get to the wilderness, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, is going to have certain very special garments. And on one of those garments, he's going to need shoham stones, avnei shoham, onyx stones. Where are we going to find onyx stones in the wilderness? Don't worry, we brought them out of Egypt because those onyx stones were sitting there from the very beginning of creation, waiting for the Jewish people to leave Egypt with that gold, receive that crystalline substance from heaven, the manna, and then have those onyx stones, the avnei shoham, ready and waiting. That's God telling us, I prepare all your footsteps. I'm here, the ultimate puppeteer, making sure that you have everything. And he's sending us that message right at the very beginning. I'll show you another example of this. Suppose I asked you, and by the way, file this question away for the next time you sit down at your Seder on Passover. What did the original, the OG matzah taste like? The matzah that we brought, or our ancestors brought out of Egypt. I asked this to a friend who grew up not eating kosher, and he said, I don't know, maybe like the Domino's pizza crust. I asked it to another friend who grew up keeping kosher, and he said, I don't know, like matzah? Like what would it have tasted like? We're told by the commentators an astonishing answer. The original matzah tasted like the manna from heaven. Now, one second, what do you mean it tasted like the manna? The Jews had never tasted manna before. They didn't first taste manna until after they came out of Egypt and after their supply of matzah had been eaten. Then God made it rain manna from heaven, and they tasted it, yeah. Because when they tasted it, what happened? They went out of Egypt. They baked the matzah. We know there aren't a whole lot of ingredients, right? There's dough and there's water, and you bake it. They were in a hurry, so they had to be less than 18 minutes, so it was wafer thin, nice and crispy. What could it have tasted like? They bit into it. It's like, what is that weird taste? They apparently didn't know what that taste was. This again was God foreshadowing. Don't worry, you're going to taste that in the future. That is the taste of freedom. That is the taste of miracles. That's me adding that taste to tell you, I've got your backs. I will be watching you over here in the wilderness. If you're wondering what are you going to eat because you did not bring enough matzah to supply you for however long you're going to be in the wilderness, don't worry. It's going to rain food from heaven. So when they would taste the manna for the first time, they'd say, oh, that was what that weird taste was. That was God telling us, don't worry, I've got your backs, by secretly adding that taste to the original matzah. Our job, of course, is to tell God, unlike what the spies did, we believe in you, and we're looking for your hand. We see your hand all over. And we see this in a very interesting way. Miriam is 6 or 7 years old. She tells her father, Dad, you're worse than Pharaoh. He says, what? She says, yeah, you made a decree, and your decree when you separated from mom was against Jewish boys and girls being born. Pharaoh's decree is only against Jewish boys. He only said to drown the Jewish boys, so you're worse than him. And by the way, I had a prophecy, you're going to get back together with mom, and the Jewish Savior is going to be born. He kisses her on the head, gets back together with his wife. He's the leader of the Jewish people. Many other people had followed his lead and also separated from their wives. They all get back together. And so not only is Moshe born, Moses, baby Moses, but a lot of other babies are born. And now it's 3 months later. Moshe was born prematurely. The Egyptians kept very careful track, like the Nazis later. They had very careful records. They knew the due date. So they come snooping, knocking on the door. Where's Moshe? So the parents know that they've got to get rid of him before the Egyptians show up. So they put him in a basket and it's all over. Her father, Amram, taps Miriam on the head and says, what happened to your prophecy? His mother, Moshe's mother, builds him in his little teva, in his ark, a chuppah on top of it. Because she says, I'm not going to see your chuppah. I'm not going to see you get married because obviously he's going to die in the Nile. His older brother, Aaron, is crying. Only Miriam walks past the Nile. And we're told that she stationed herself there to see what would happen to him. She was not going along the Nile and stationing herself there to see whether or not he'd be saved. She stationed herself there to see how he would be saved. She had the prophecy. She knew God's going to save him. I got to see this. I want to see God's hand in action. Wait, what's going on? Is that the princess reaching out her hand, taking him in? She wants to adopt him? Oh, and she wants a Jewish mother to nurse him? Oh, and she's willing to pay? God, that was pretty good how you did that. And then years later, we're told in the Megillah, in Megillus Esther that we read on Purim, that Esther, not just a relative, but the wife of Mordecai, the greatest rabbi of the generation, because of her beauty, is selected to be taken against her will to the harem of the king because he's trying to choose a new wife. And this is brutal and it's tragic. The wife of the greatest rabbi being taken involuntarily to the harem, and he's going to spend a night with, or longer, with each one of the candidates, and they're not going to be playing Monopoly. It's horrifying. And we're told the exact same language. Mordecai and Esther, when they write the Megillah, use the exact same language to the T. Mordecai stationed himself every day outside the harem to see what would happen to Esther. Why do they choose that language? To burn home the lesson that no matter what, greatest thing ever, our future Savior is about to be saved. The princess is coming in now. She's going to take him out of the basket. She's going to adopt him. She's going to bring him up, and he's going to grow to become the Savior. Mordecai is saying, God, I don't understand it. I don't know why something so horrifying could happen. My wife taken away from me by this animal, and now involuntarily she's going to have to be with him. And who knows, maybe she'll be chosen, which she was, but I'm stationing myself here to say, I know that this comes from you, because everything comes from you. Whether it looks good or looks bad, it's all good. Sometimes it's obviously good and we don't need an explanation. We just had a new son or daughter or grandson or granddaughter. We got married, we got a promotion, we found the house of our dreams. Something beautiful happened. And other times something horrible, nasty, brutal, nonsensical, terrifying, unbelievably painful happens. And we don't know why, but we recognize, God, it came from you. How do I know that? Because it happened. There's another example of this in the story of King David. Before he's appointed king, King Saul is the king. And he's very upset at David. He thinks David's coming to get his throne, and he's irrationally upset at him. But his son, Shaul's son, Jonathan, Yehonah's son, he's loyal to his best friend David, the future king. And he tells David, I'm going to go check the temperature. I'm going to go see if Dad is still upset at you. So here's what we're going to do. Tomorrow, I'm going to come back here with my apprentice, my assistant, my armsman, and I'm going to shoot arrows. You look in the distance, hide and take a look and listen in. If I shoot the arrow and I say to him, oh, the arrow's in front of you, bring it back, that means it's safe to come back. And if I don't, if I shoot the arrow past him and I say the arrow's past you, then go. Because that means that my father's still upset. Now what he should say is, go because my father's still upset. You'll say, well, maybe he doesn't want to say that. Maybe that's not proper honor to his father. So then just say, go because it's dangerous. You'll say, okay, that's still not proper to say that about his father because his father is irrationally angry at David. Then let him just say, if I say the arrow is past you, go. Trust me. David will know what he means. If it's before him, it's safe to come back. If it's past him, go because it's dangerous. You know what he says? He says, if I tell him that the arrow is past you, then you, David, go, because that means that God has sent you. What do you mean God has sent me? God hasn't sent me anywhere. Your father's acting like a maniac. God hasn't told me to go anywhere. That's the message that Yehonah and that Jonathan is giving to David and giving to us. If my father's still upset, which means it's not safe to come home, David, you have to treat it that God is sending you. Why? Because it's dangerous. Because you have to run. And because you have to run, that must mean that it's as if God's sending you, because everything that happens comes from God. And that's why Maimonides says, the more you believe, the more you get. And that's why, in the stunning story of when Sarah overhears the message from the 3 Arabs that aren't Arabs, they're actually angels. And they tell Abraham and his 10, next year at this time, you're going to have a son with your wife Sarah. And she laughs and says, I'm going to have a son. I'm old. My husband's old. And God immediately appears to Abraham. And God immediately appears to Abraham and says, why did Sarah laugh? Is there anything that I can't do? Wouldn't it have been a cuter story if God had just appeared to Abraham and said, just wait, it's going to be great. Wait till you see her face when she realizes she's expecting. No, God says to Abraham, why did she laugh? Hinting to Abraham, go talk to her. You've got to get her to believe, because if she doesn't believe, then I'm not doing this miracle. I don't do miracles for people who don't believe in me. I know you believe because I previously told you and you laughed tears of joy, but she laughed tears of incredulity, tears of disbelief. So you gotta go explain it to her that I'm going to do this and then I can do it. And that's why I had to say to her, when we say Dayenu, it's very weird. We say, and even if God had taken us out of Egypt and he hadn't taken us across the river, that would have been enough. Really? We would have been dead or recaptured. And even if he had taken us to the mountain and not given us the Torah, that would have been enough. Really? We wouldn't have gotten the Torah. And the answer, of course, is that we would be recognizing at each one of those steps, we don't understand it. It makes no sense. He took us out of Egypt and then had us die in the river or had us recaptured. It makes no sense. But we're saying Dayenu, it would have been enough because we trust you. If that had happened, even though it would have been beyond our ken, beyond our ability to understand it, we wouldn't have asked questions because we know someday we'll be up in heaven and you'll explain everything to us across the tapestry of history. You just have to recognize when you connect the dots, it's God doing his thing, working things out. And that could be, like I said, when things happen that are obviously good or seemingly good, and when things happen that seem to be bad and feel horrible. A few months ago, I was returning my car. The lease was up in several days. My son said to me, Dad, I know you're going to be traveling. Could I use your car? I said, no problem. Sure, take it on your skiing trip. So he takes it on a skiing trip, and what do you know? A tire blows out. Okay, it looks like I'm going to have to buy a new tire even though the lease is up in a few days. No, wait, I don't have to buy a new tire. Happens to be that I have a spare. I had bought a spare and left it in the trunk. No problem. There's a spare in the trunk. Just put the spare on. Tiny problem. He had taken the spare tire out in order to fit his skis and his friend's skis in the trunk. The tire was sitting in my garage. He was a couple hundred miles away. It was like God was saying, you think that because there's only a couple, 2-3 days left on the lease, that I can't make you pick up the expense of another tire? Sure I can, because I run the world. I must have needed some kind of a slap, a little financial setback, whatever it was for that extra tire. I'm not in charge. God's in charge. Think about that on a bigger scale. How many resumes do you think Enron had? How many people were desperately waiting to hear back? They had interviewed with this incredible company and the interview went well and they're waiting for the callback or they're waiting for the offer or they got the offer and they're about to accept it and then bankruptcy, fraud. And those people that were dying to get that job are saying to themselves, thank God that I didn't get that job. Thank God the interview didn't go well. Thank God I didn't get the callback. Thank God I didn't accept the offer. Think about Madoff. You know what his shtick was? He pushed people off. You had billionaires saying, Bernie, you're the best. You're the GOAT. Nobody gets returns like yours. Come on, let me put something in. I mean, you won't take 50, you take 20, take 10, take 5 million. Bernie, let me in. And he'd say, no, we're full. And push people off, which means that at the time the world's greatest fraud was discovered, there were people who were desperate, knocking on his door, would have done anything for the right to give funds to somebody who was going to embezzle them in a Ponzi scheme. Imagine how those people felt. The people at the end who weren't let in. Thank God. Thank you, God. I called him and called him and called him and he wouldn't take my money. Probably felt pretty good. They weren't feeling good when they were rebuffed all those times, but they were feeling real good afterwards. God runs the world. He sets the footsteps of mankind. Walter Isaacson tells this wild story in his biography of Bill Gates. There was this company, I think it was IBM, that needed code written. Went to Gates. Gates said, no, ask my friend. They went to the friend. The friend was away for the weekend. They came back to Gates and said, listen, we need you to do it. He said, all right, as long as I get to keep the rights to the software. The company figured, the money's not in the software, the money's in the hardware. Little did they know that the money was in the software, Microsoft. A friend was away for the weekend. God was like, no, Bill, it's going to you. I've got you in mind. But there's one area where we can, and I say this slowly, and I realize the gravity of what I'm about to say. There's one area where we can force God's steps. I'm going to say it again, slowly, and with all proper respect. We can force God's steps. And you'll say, what are you talking about? What do you mean we, puny we, humankind, can force God to do something? Yes. Because there's one time throughout the entire Tanakh, all the books of the Torah and the writings, and the prophets, where God says, test me on this. Bring your charity and test me to see if I don't open the storehouses of heaven and give you blessing without limit. That's the one time. If we give charity, God has said, you can count on me. You can actually test me. You can say, I want it back. Now, what does that mean? Does it mean if you give more charity, you'll make more money? I think it does. I think that works. But maybe you'll give charity and you won't make more money the next year. And you'll say, what's going on? God said to test me. God is good for his word. You'll get it back in other ways. You'll get it back by being saved from some difficulty, by having some health scare turn out to be not a scare, by having a surgery go well, by having your children or grandchildren protected. He will. He's promised us that if you give charity, you can test him and he's good for it. And we have to believe that every time we give $1. And we have to prepare our own steps. There is a story that's a sickening one, but I'll share it because it's instructive. There's a fellow named Rex Uerman, better known as the Gilgo Beach Killer. He killed many, many women and was undetected. Couldn't find them for years until finally there was a DNA match and they went and arrested him in his office. He was an architect, successful guy, but he was a lunatic. He was a psychopath. And what they found was that he had made elaborate lists in preparation, single-space typed pages. They released them. I wish I could unsee them. I read the article, so I saw the lists. Hyper-specific. His list of preparation, his list of the supplies that he needed, his list of the clothing to wear, his list of how to abduct, his list of how to kill, his list of how to dispose of the body, his list of how to avoid detection. And I thought to myself, what? This guy, a psychopath to the worst degree imaginable, he made these lists? Where are our lists? Where's my list? Why don't I have a single space list that I review every day, or at least once a week, before I go to pray, with all the different things I should be thinking about? Wear clothing that's respectful. Get there on time. Stay until the end. Don't talk during the prayers. Remember to answer Amen to every blessing. When you take your 3 steps back and then your 3 steps forward during the Amidah, the Shemona Esrei, remember that you are literally standing between the Kruvim, the cherubs, those golden statues that were on top of the ark. You're standing there talking to God one-on-one. Where's my list? This lunatic, this psychopath made lists before committing the most insane, evil acts imaginable, and I don't have a list for my mitzvahs, my list before I do the mitzvahs that I'm planning to do. Shouldn't I also have lists? Shouldn't we also have lists? And we have to remember that sometimes we help prepare the steps of others. We're all influencers. If we're parents, our children watch everything we do, good or bad. We're constantly role modeling, like it or not. If we're influencers, if we're friends, if we're employers, if we're employees and we have co-employees, if we're neighbors, how we act interpersonally, people follow that lead. You do something wrong, other people say, well, I guess it's okay to do that. That person did it. You do something right, people say, I should also do that. Yeah, that person gave charity. Yeah, that person invited over a friend. Yeah, that person, helped somebody out. We rub off on others. A friend told me that not long ago I ran into someone, they introduced themselves to each other, and the fellow said, I can't believe it's you. You have no idea how much I have to thank you. And my friend said, what are you talking about? He said, I want you to understand that when I was in my early 30s, I lost my father, and I had to say Kaddish, and I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I said, how am I going to do this? I'm not comfortable with the words. I'm not comfortable standing up in front of an audience, and I'm going to have to do this for 11 months, 3 times a day. How am I going to do it? And then all of a sudden, I remembered that when I was a kid, I was 15, 16, 17 years old, an 11-year-old lost his father. And that 11-year-old got up in the hall where we prayed in the school in front of a few hundred students and said Kaddish. And I said to myself, if that 11-year-old could do that, if he could summon up that type of internal fortitude, then I could do that. And that 11-year-old was you. And so I want to thank you. Another story. I saw this happen. Rav David Feinstein, one of the great rabbis of the most recent generation, passed away not long ago. And several years before he passed away, he was at an event and he was at the coat room. He got his coat, he got his wife's coat, and then he was helping his wife put her coat on. And someone took a picture, a beautiful picture, the great rabbi helping his wife put her coat on. And his wife, Rebbetzin Feinstein, saw the camera, saw the fellow behind the camera and said, you cannot show that picture to anyone. And the fellow taking the picture said, why not? It's such a beautiful picture. The Rav helping his wife on with her coat. And she said, no, because someone else might see that picture. A wife might see that picture. And she might say to her husband, oh, the rabbi, the famous rabbi, he helps his wife on with her coat, and you don't help me with mine. And that could cause pain. That could cause strife in a marriage. So that picture goes nowhere. That's somebody on the spot worrying about the influence that they could have, even a picture of them could have. Here's a final example. I filmed a video once, told over the following story. I was talking to a fellow on the phone. He said, oh, where are you from? Philadelphia. Oh, Philadelphia. Do you know Rabbi so-and-so? I said, of course. He was my 4th grade rabbi. He goes, oh, really? I happen to be related to him. I said, is he still around? He said, yeah, you want me to get him on the phone? I said, sure. He gets the rabbi on the phone. Rabbi, it's Harry Rothenberg on the phone. Harry, how are you? How's your father? How's your mother? How's your brother? How's your sister? And he names by name my younger siblings whom he had taught. I said, great, all doing great. How are you? And we have a wonderful back and forth. And he says, do you remember when you were my student that I used to call you Tzvi? I said, of course. He says, you remember why? I said, yeah, you explained it to me. Because my Hebrew name is Herschel, which is actually Yiddish. And Herschel in Yiddish means deer. And Tzvi in Hebrew means deer. And so you called me Tzvi instead of Herschel. He says, wow, you remember. And I said, yeah, I sure do. And after we finished exchanging pleasantries and greetings, I hung up the phone and I walked into the next room where my wife was, and I must have looked like a ghost. And she said, what happened? And I said, you remember the story that I'm sure I told you about how my 4th grade Rebbe tortured me when I was like 8 years old, called me Tzvi and not Herschel, and it wasn't my name, and I was too shy and powerless to say anything, so I had to sit there the whole year with him calling me a different name? She said, yeah, I remember that story. I said, I just spoke to him. She said, what are you talking about? I said, I just spoke to him. It's been 50 years. And he asked me, do you remember that I used to call you Tzvi? I said, of course. I wanted to say to him, yeah, of course, because he used to torture me. But I realized the way he asked it, what he was saying was, do you remember? I liked you. I used to call you that special name. I even explained it to you. That, yeah, I know your name's Herschel, but I'm going to call you Tzvi. It was like a term of affection, a term of endearment. For 50 years, I carried around this baggage, thinking that he was trying to torture me. He wasn't. It was a term of endearment. And someone saw that video where I told that story. Somebody I know, actually a young rabbi. And he wrote to me, and he said, Harry, I watched the video, and you should know that 30 years ago, my 4th grade Rebbe called me Mortimer, and I'm still trying to recover from it. I hope you'll inspire me. And I wrote back, wow, God willing, and good luck, Hatzlacha. That was about 11 a.m. At 12:45 a.m. that night, he texted me, Harry, I want to thank you. I did it. I forgave my Rebbe. Now, I had forgiven because it was just a misunderstanding. He meant it as a term of endearment. He never even got that far. He didn't meet the Rebbe. He didn't talk to the Rebbe. He didn't realize it was a term of endearment. As far as he knows, maybe the Rebbe was trying to make fun of him, but he heard my story and said, you know what? I've been carrying this around. I've been letting this story or that fellow live rent-free in my head for all these years. I'm going to forgive him, because that's how we're going to rebuild the temple, by getting along. I don't think it was an accident that the World Cup final was a few days ago during the week of Tisha B'Av. More people watching it than have ever come together to watch a sporting event. It's a hint to us as the Jewish people. We need to come together. We need to be together. We need to get along. We need to work out to the extent we can our differences. And if we can't, at least respect each other and recognize, all of us, that God is running the show. He's up there putting everything in motion, setting up the steps of mankind like he foreshadowed at the very beginning, and he expects big things from us as the Jewish people. He wants us to be the greatest example the world has ever known of how to act appropriately towards your fellow man and towards God. And hopefully if we do that, we'll rebuild the temple real soon.